Chag Sameach, good Yom Tov, happy Passover. Welcome to our house, to the Lefkovich family Passover Seder. We have many things in common. One of them is that we all had plans to be tonight somewhere else. We were supposed to be in Israel, celebrating with our families there for the first time in almost 25 years. And I know that each one of you was planning to be in a different place. But here we are, we're together, alone. I would like to think about it more like together. It's not the same, but we will try to make it the best Seder we can under these circumstances, because that's what Passover is all about. So we're going to introduce you to some of our family traditions. The first one is, before we even begin this Seder, we're going to have a shot of horseradish vodka. This vodka is kosher for Passover vodka. This is not a grain vodka. If you want to learn how to make it, I know that Gali has made a wonderful YouTube video with all the instructions. There is no blessing for that, just pouring. If you made yourselves, I strongly encourage you to do it. It really takes the edge off the beginning and gets it in the real spirit of celebrating. So we say L'chaim.
L'chaim.
Whoa, that was strong.
Let's put this away.
You know what, since you're standing, I'll stand with you. The first thing we are going to do is lighting the festival candles. Okay. You know, we are expecting a little bit of technical issues. Hopefully they will be rare and far between. So let's please join Gali as we light the candles. Yeah, we tested 3 different ones, so that was supposed to work.
It's working. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו לחגנו אשר יום טוב.
Read it in English. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe,
who made us holy by divine commandments and commanded us to kindle the lights of Shabbat and of the
festival. It's not Shabbat today, but the text is there. And since this is the first time we celebrate Passover, we are saying the blessing of gratitude, thanking God for keeping us alive, for sustaining us, and for enabling us, despite the circumstances, to celebrate together at this time.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
I read many articles about the coronavirus, Many of the writers use the image of the corona or our situation is not a sprint, but rather a marathon. What they tried to do was quite clear. We're there for the long run. It's not going to be an easy race. It's going to be long, arduous, painful time, and therefore we have to pace ourselves to be prepared. But it seems like none of the people who use this phrase is familiar with marathons. Because when you run a long race, the last thing that you want to consider is the length of the course. Now, you don't just start saying, wow, I have to run 26 miles. It's so, no. Once you start the race, you try to keep two things in your mind simultaneously. You have to think always about the next mile. So you finish mile 1, you don't say, oh my God, I still have 25 miles to go, I'm going to die. No. Finish mile 1 and immediately say, wow, okay, did it? Now I'm going to make another one. I'm going to make it to mile 2. But at the same time, you always keep an image of yourself, of your future self, crossing the finish line. This image, even though it happens many hours before it actually happens, gives you the psychological, spiritual, emotional strength that boosts your energy and makes the entire journey much easier. This plague will be over. Let's not think about the entire length of it. Just let's think about the next step. So I remember last week I focused on Shabbat, and it was a wonderful Shabbat. And then we had the interfaith service. It was different, but it was wonderful to be with my colleagues from across the road, the other clergy. And then I was focusing on Passover, and Passover is a very happy holiday. But all the time I'm thinking about the first thing I want to do when this plague is over. So I want you to do the same in your homes, even if you happen to be by yourself, because unfortunately I know that some people must be by themselves, without thinking too much. Just what is the first things that come to mind that you want to do the minute this situation is over? I'll tell you, you may not believe me because it sounds too rabbinic, but I see my future self in our sanctuary during Shabbat services with all my friends in the same space. I never knew I would miss Shabbat so much as I miss it right now. What's the thing that you are missing the most?
I'm a hugger. I want to hug my friends. I want to see everybody and be able to not stand so far from them and touch their hand perhaps and hug them and have a face-to-face interaction.
Yanni.
I want to be with people, but not on FaceTime.
Yeah, people not on FaceTime. Mr. Ben.
I want to.
You can enter your face.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want. You don't have to, but.
I want to attend school, which seems really weird because who likes school? But I just got into Dreyfus and I can't wait to go. So.
Show off. Maya.
I'm really excited to go back to Gainesville, where I go to school at the University of Florida, see my friends, and to be back for studying the things that I really care about in person and not in Zoom classes.
Go Gators.
Thank you. And I hope that you are sharing some of your thoughts using the chat box and other means. I know that Marcy is monitoring it. One of the things that we really miss is having Rabbi Brett and Marcy with us. Yeah, it's so weird because, and it's going to be painful later because we have to do all the singing, but I don't want to warn you too much. I just did actually. Yes, we had to keep the entire Seder as simple as possible. We just don't want any technological glitches. Now, before we continue, I just want to calm you down for a second. I know I used the image of a marathon. It's not an indication of the length of the Seder. We know that we have a very diverse group of people with different length of attention span. We try to have a Seder for all of you. So the first part will not be too long. And then we are just going to say goodbye, and each one of us will have our food. So with that, I'm going to share the screen again for the text of the Haggadah. Oh, I just forgot to mention something quite important. Since this night is definitely different than all other nights, we use this line a lot and we may use it again. We took the liberty to make some minor changes in the order of this service. Now, the service always ends with the song of Leshana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Now, when the rabbis were talking about being in Jerusalem in the future, they did not just mean Jerusalem as a physical space. Jerusalem was a place of hope, a symbol of something better. So we want to think of ourselves at the end of this difficult time, or perhaps really during next Passover in Jerusalem. So instead of just singing it at the very end, let's sing it right now. Leshana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Leshana Haba B'Yerushalayim, Leshana Haba B'Yerushalayim, Leshana Haba B'Yerushalayim, Leshana Haba B'Yerushalayim. Please admire the image here as we scroll along. Going back to the image of the marathon of mile by mile and not thinking about the entire length of the route, the ancient rabbis gave us the order of the Seder. Seder literally means an order, and they gave us this order so people will know what to expect. Now, most of these items, are 15 here, are rather short. Only one of them is longer. In the middle, it's Magid, the telling of the story of the Exodus. So let's read it in Hebrew and then the translation. Kadesh, the blessing over wine or grape juice. Urchatz, symboling hand washing. Karpas, dipping a vegetable in salt water. By the way, please read out loud wherever you are. It will make you feel more part of it. Unfortunately, I cannot see or hear you, but I know you're doing it. Yachatz is when we break the middle matzah and then hide it for the afikoman. Magid is telling of the story. Rochza, hand washing, the second one before we eat. Motzi matzah, eating matzah and saying the blessings over the food. Maror, eating the herbs, the bitter herb. Korech, eating matzah and bitter herb, and actually with the charoset too, the special Passover sandwich. Shulchan orech, which means the meal. Tzafun, eating the afikoman after we are finding it. Barech, blessing after the meal, benching. Hallel, reciting the Hallel, the collection of psalms, thanking God, and Nirtzah is the conclusion of this service. We have our Seder plate that I will stand and show it to you. There isn't only one version of Seder plate. There are several ones. Some have 5 items, some have 6, some have 7. The normal ones have the bitter herb. Then we use horseradish. I was very happy to be able to get one in Publix, even though they raised the price way too much, $7 for a root. We have the bone. If you can see, this is not a lamb. This is a chicken wing. The reason is, actually there are a few of them. One is that we couldn't get the lamb shank. The other one is that in Israel, the emphasis is not on the lamb, but we call it zoa, which means an arm, which is a symbol of the strength with which God took us out of Egypt. So it's not an unusual thing to use something that looks like an arm and I guess a wing. We do it. And Ben reminded me that last night, that was our dinner, we had fabulous chicken wings that we made ourselves, and it was very hard to save one for tonight. We have an egg, Beitzam, that symbolizes renewal, and this is the springtime of birth and rebirth. We have the charoset, which again, if you have not seen the famous movie that Yoni and Maya made about how to make
Maya?
and the other Maya, who we normally call Yoni.
No, you said Yoni. You forgot your wife.
Gali and Yoni made this famous movie that became a real hit. There are probably 11 viewers now on YouTube. Charoset, which this one is really fabulous, based on Gali's grandmother's recipe. It's really tasty, but it looks quite disgusting, and that was the whole point of it. It looks like mud, and this is the mud that the Hebrews used when they built these garrison houses for the Pharaoh. We have the karpas, the green leaf. It doesn't have to be only parsley, that's what we have here. It can be celery. Oh, we have celery here. We have horseradish. And this one is really, really special because it all comes from celery. And it all comes from the One School's vegetable garden. So many of you may not know, our amazing One School preschool has a garden that Paula Dector and Mike started many years ago. And today Paula texted me early and she said, we're there and it's fabulous. Do you want some fresh stuff? And I said, definitely. And I want everyone to be able to see this beautiful parsley and other things that our own children grow. We have the orange. Not everyone has an orange. For 2,000 years, nobody had an orange. But lately, we started to use an orange when we talk about, to emphasize the idea of equality, especially the inclusion of women in Jewish lives. I know that most of you now take for granted the fact that women are rabbis, are cantors, they do everything and there is an equality. But until recently, it has not been the case, and still in some communities, it's not the case. So this is our Seder plate, but we chose to share a plate that we may use next year. Because next year we are going to talk a lot about, can you remember what happened last year? So we made a little plate, Seder plate, that is really unique to our situations. Some of these items, by the way, we had to go to the safe in order to get. So we had the wipes that almost impossible to get anymore. We have one maybe. We have the hand sanitizer. We have this ruler or yardstick that helps us to measure the correct distance of 6 feet or 8 feet between people, the mask that is necessary. We even have a few gloves And of course, the hero of the time that will be remembered for generations is the toilet paper. With your families, you may want to add some other special item to this Seder plate. Thank you, Ben, for schlepping it back to. And we continue with the rest of the service. The next thing is Kadesh, is the Kiddush. We're going to drink 4 cups of wine. There are many different explanations of why 4. I encourage you really to think about 4 different things that are relevant. Wine in our tradition represents joy, represents abundance, and even the most difficult times of our life, there is some joy. This Passover is so far the most joyous moment I had in a long time, and maybe you too. So we pour the wine traditionally, and that's part of the deal, is that we pour wine for each other. We don't pour it for ourselves, but I will just do it since I started, and then I'll give it to Gali. We enjoy the wine, especially since we're in our home and we don't have to drive, and I guess that's the case for most of you. You're not going to drive, so there is less of a risk of drinking too much of the wine. We'd like to go from a lighter to heavier wine, so we start with one of our favorite kinds of wine, Pinot Noir from Willamette Valley in Oregon. Thank you, Kabi. It was a really nice gift for Passover. And so we pour and we rise for the blessing. I say we rise, we sit. It's your home, do whatever you feel like doing. I'll try to negotiate between the transliteration and the Hebrew. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, boreh peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher בחר בנו מכל העם ורוממנו מכל לשון וקידשנו במצוותיו. ותיתן לנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה מועדים לשמחה, חגים וזמנים לששון, את יום חג המצות הזה, זמן חירותנו, מקרא קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. כי בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ומועדי קודשך באהבה וברצון, ובששון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש ישראל, והזמנים. לחיים. Good. He's very good. For the next one, I'll switch to a glass because I never like drinking from metal utensils. And the next thing we are doing, it's in the order, is washing our hands. Traditionally, we wash our hands twice during the Passover Seder. The first one is just symbolic or ritualistic. We do it in order to remember what the ancient priests did during the time of the temple. And then we wash again just before we start eating. But today, washing our hands is not just a symbolic thing. It's one of the things that really keep us alive. So we are going to do it in a very serious way. We're using a hand sanitizer here because it's easier. You cannot see it, but you have to believe me, there are some computers and some wires here, so we try to keep the table beautiful and at the same time quite safe. Before we came back from Europe, because we had to and we wanted to be here, Gali told me, you know, the best way for me to recognize other Americans in Europe is that when I go to a public bathroom and I wash my hands, there are people who stand near me singing with me, "Happy birthday to you." Because we read somewhere that happy birthday takes 20 seconds. Twice, yeah, of course, twice. Tonight, we decided, instead of happy birthday, to sing another song. And again, we're going to change slightly the order of the regular service as we are going to sing a different song for washing our hands. So first I'm going to put some of this life-saving liquid, and let me just scroll before I continue. Dayenu. We checked many times, 20 seconds. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dai dayenu, 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 dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dayenu, dayenu. Ilu hotzianu mimitzrayim, hotzianu mimitzrayim, dayenu. Dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dai dayenu, 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 dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dayenu, dayenu. Ilu natan lanu et hashabat, natan lanu et hashabat, dayenu. Dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dai dayenu, 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 dayenu. Dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dayenu, dayenu. Ilu natan lanu et haTorah, natan lanu et haTorah, dayenu. Dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dai dayenu, 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 dayenu. Dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dayenu, dayenu. Let's try to sing it in English. Weird, but quite fun, I find it. We'll sing the whole 3 verses and then the dayenu. Had God brought us out of Egypt, only brought us out of Egypt. Had God brought us out of Egypt, dayenu. Had God given us the Torah, only given us the Torah. Had God given us the Torah, dayenu. Had God given us the Sabbath, only given us the Sabbath. Had God given us the Sabbath, dayenu. Dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dai dayenu, 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 dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dai dayenu, dayenu, dayenu. The next part in our Seder is the karpas, the green vegetable. Originally, the Seder or Passover was celebrated at the ancient temple, and the main component was the Paschal lamb. At the year 70, the temple was destroyed, so the rabbis had to come up with a ritual, which is still celebrating. This is the Seder, to replace it. And they were thinking a lot how to do it and chose the model of the Roman Greek symposium. The symposium was really an elaborate event in which people got together, they drank a lot of wine, they discussed and debated some serious philosophical themes, and then at the end, they had a full meal. Now, in order to keep them going before the main dishes arrived, they had hors d'oeuvres, or crudité, if you will. They used to take different kinds of vegetables and other kinds of hors d'oeuvres and dip them in either salt water or some other tangy sauces. So they ate enough to give them some energy to continue with the program, but of course did not eat too much because they knew that the main meal will arrive later on. Now the rabbis made some major changes. They kept the idea of the symbolic food and discussions, definitely wine, that's why 4 cups, that's a lot of wine, but there are some interesting and important differences that we have to remember. The Greek-Roman symposium was open only to men, while the rabbi made it into a family-oriented event with a special emphasis on children. In all holidays, we involve children, but the Seder is involved around children. And of course, they included women. In the Greek symposium, only people with means were invited. You had to be wealthy to be part of it. The emphasis of the Seder is that every single person has to participate. It's not just for the rich, it's for everyone. And if we know of others who cannot afford, who don't have a place to go to, we must invite them. Of course, this year makes it impossible, not just harder. But please remember one of the lessons from this year. We don't want to be alone. So next year, we will invite people, we'll make it impossible, or we even be more generous as we donate some funds to help others to have what they need to celebrate. The kalpas in my family growing up meant just everyone got a little piece of parsley, and I don't know how many people like to just eat parsley, but that's what we did. So each one got their little parsley, dipped it in the water and ate. But the real meaning was really eat hors d'oeuvres, eat more than this parsley or anything else that you do. Some people eat eggs, and since we met Bruce and Maureen Cohen and their family, we started to eat chopped liver because Bruce has a tradition of cooking dozens of pounds of chopped liver that he shares with friends and the temple. So whenever we have a big service at the temple, we eat. So eat these hors d'oeuvres that you have on the table. Again, it's not going to be a super long service, but why not? So take something from the Seder plate. Oh, God, it has some other things. We have here different things, as you can see. I'll stay with the parsley. And let's go to the blessings. Oops. Share screen.
Yoni, you can take a napkin and put it in.
Okay, so kalpas, and we dip it in salt water or anything else that you have because we want a tiny bit of a kick. And we say the blessing, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, boreh peri ha'adamah. Praise are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who created the fruit of the earth. Thank you, Paula. This is really a great parsley. People don't appreciate it enough. Okay, feel free to eat some other things. We continue now with the achatz, breaking of the middle matzah. The center of the table, there is a plate of matzahs or matzot. We take the middle one and break it. The Pesach story begins with a broken world amid slavery and oppression. The sound of breaking of the matzah sends us into the fractured existence, which now we don't need too many reminders. We feel it every moment, only to become whole again when we find the broken half, the afikoman, at the end of the Seder. And stop. So I have the plate of the matzot here. And we have different matzot. The ones on the top, as you can see, were made by Mr. Yoni. As you can imagine, everyone has a little bit too much time on their hands. All you need to do is to make sure that it doesn't spend more than 18 minutes. That's the magic word. So let's use Yoni's matzahs, right? Because they're so special.
And this is a napkin for this.
And this is a napkin in which we're going to keep the other half for the afikuman. Now, you may want to take a matzah yourselves, but before you break it, you may want to think or to share with the other people at the table, what really breaks your heart this year? What makes the world seem broken to you this year? So we break it, and we take the part and we wrap it. And at one point we will hide it, and the kids may or may not find it. I had some disaster Seders in which none of the kids found it. They didn't take it so well. Yeah, the chocolates.
That sounds good.
When Duron kept on walking around.
So we did that, and this is the time to start the big part, the major part of the Seder, the Magid, the telling of the story. Magid comes from the same root as Haggadah, which means to tell. And we're going to tell the story of the Exodus. The story, by the way, does not appear in our Haggadah. There are many interpretations why not. Some say because they wanted people to do some work themselves. Some say that everyone knew the story. So there was no reason to mention it. Some people said that the expectation was to go beyond. I don't really know, but we have to make sure that we tell the story. We will tell it in different ways, but it's interesting to know that the story begins with a song in Aramaic, the song that talks about the Lachmania, which means the lechem of oni, the bread of poverty, the bread of affliction. There's a beautiful midrash that tells us why we start the entire storytelling component with the song in Aramaic. I mean, it's not Hebrew, it's not English, it's not Yiddish, it's none of the languages that people were familiar. And the answer is that the angels, the real angels up there, speak all languages except of Aramaic. So the rabbis chose to start the song, the telling of poverty, of encouraging us to take care of everyone who is in need, to tell it in Aramaic. So the angels won't understand, or that we will not talk to the angels. When it comes to solve issues of poverty, of helping others, it's not enough just to look up at God and say, please God, help these poor people. Please God, bring food to these hungry people. No, this is not the angel's job. This is ours. So let's sing it a little bit in Aramaic. And if you're brave enough, go ahead and join us.
All right.
Halachmania. Diachalu, achalu avhatana, be'ara b'mitzrayim, be'al dichtin yetei ve'yechol, kol ditzrich yetei ve'yifach, ha'ata, ha'acha, eshana, ha'abaha, Be'a'adei Israel, Ata Avdei Leshana Haba Benei Chorim. And let's read it together in English. This is the bread of affliction, which our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Let all who are hungry come and eat.
Let all who are in need come and celebrate Passover. Today we are here, next year in the land of Israel. Today we are slaves, next year we will be free.
In order to teach our children and everyone else, but the emphasis was on the children, the story, the lessons, the morals of our history, we begin, or at least put very much in the beginning of the telling of the story, the obligation to ask some questions. Free people ask questions, slaves do not. They just do whatever they're told without questioning it. But now when we're free people, we ask, and we're encouraged to ask as many questions as possible. The rabbis tell us that it's even more important to ask the questions than to answer. The main song that we know is Ma Nishtana Halayla Hazeh, how this night is different than all other nights. This night is really different. I would like to encourage you just to share it with the people around you or to write in the chat box. What makes this night different for you personally, behind the obvious, but also different does not have to be either only bad. No, there are some positive things too. Maybe you feel something positive that makes this night different. And what is the one thing that next year you want the Seder to have that we cannot have this year? So traditionally, the kids ask the questions and we're traditional. So kids.
Ready?
Oh, yeah.
Ma nishtana halayla ze mikol halayla
שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים חמץ ומצה, חמץ ומצה. הלילה זה כולו מצה. הלילה זה כולו מצה. שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים שאר ירקות, הלילה זה מרור, הלילה זה מרור, שבכל הלילות אנו מטבילים אפילו פעם אחת, הלילה זה שתי פעמים, הלילה זה שתי פעמים, שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים בין יושבים ובין מסובין, הלילה זה כולנו מסובים, הלילה זה כולנו מסובים. Let's read the questions together in English. Why is this night of Passover different from all other nights of the year? On all other nights we eat unleavened bread. Why on this night do we eat only matzah? On all other nights we eat vegetables of all kinds. Why on this night must we eat bitter herbs? On all other nights we do not eat vegetables even once. Why on this night do we eat twice? On all other nights everyone sits up straight at the table. Why on this night do we recline and eat at leisure? So we'll try to answer all these questions in the next probably 10 or 15 minutes. I always think that I don't have enough material for the time. One of the things that the Haggadah talks about is the 4 children. The Haggadah recognizes that there are different personalities, there are different attitudes, Some kids want to learn more. Some kids are quite cynical and want to learn less. Some kids are just shy and don't want to do much. Some people don't know or don't feel like asking any questions. I found out that I think that is all for children are inside of each one of us, and it really depends on the situation. Sometimes we're really interested and we're into something. We ask the right questions. We want to know more. Sometimes we're just cynical and we choose the wrong attitude, but we scoff off what's happening. Sometimes we're shy. We just feel inadequate. We just feel not smart enough, not knowledgeable enough. Sometimes we just don't even know what to ask. And I also want to talk about the fifth child, and there are many other children we can add. But I think that I love all these other children, even the wicked one with the bad attitude, because they're here around the table. I'm not talking about my children, talking in general. My real problem is with the fifth child who doesn't even bother to celebrate Passover, who keeps her or himself out of the family, out of the community, out of our Jewish tradition. That's just not for me. I'm not going to waste my time. These are the children we really have to reach out to and to try to bring them back to our midst. We remember a lot our times as slaves in Egypt, and this very short song conveys the idea, Havadim Ha'inu, we were slaves to the Pharaoh in Egypt, and now, thank God, we are free. Havadim Ha'inu, Ha'inu, Ata b'nei chorim, b'nei chorim. Avadim Ha'inu, Ata b'nei chorim, b'nei chorim. Avadim Ha'inu, Ata b'nei chorim, b'nei chorim. So normally we focus on the story of the actual Exodus. The people of Israel were slaves. They cried out to God. God sent Moses. Moses went to the Pharaoh. We're going to tell this story in a moment. But I want to start this year a little bit earlier in the story because it's so relevant. It's so important. You see, slavery was not the first thing that the Pharaoh chose in order to oppress the Jews. The first thing that he chose was much worse. He wanted to kill all the Jewish baby boys. So he went to the midwives, to the Egyptian midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, and told them, whenever you help a Jewish and Israelite woman to give birth, if you see a boy, just cast this boy into the Nile, kill the boy. Shiphrah and Puah, two health professionals, just couldn't do it. Even though the Pharaoh was quite cruel and they knew what kind of a risk they were taking, they chose to defy the order, the decree of the Pharaoh, and to keep these babies alive. This year, we have so many people in the medical professions who risk their health and their lives every single day, every single hour, so other people will be healthy and safe. We always have to show gratitude to them, but I think this year we have to show gratitude more than any other time as we emphasize the role of the ancient medical professionals, health professionals, Shiphrah and Puah, the two midwives who were willing to risk their own lives in order to let other people live. So, thank you. And now we are going to, Maya, would you like to read for us, please, this beautiful version of the story? There are many ways to read it, and I just showed one of my favorite children's book from PJ Library. that tells the story so beautifully, so easily. Yes, I will play with the location of the screen if I can.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. The first Passover happened long ago in the faraway country of Egypt. A mean and powerful king called Pharaoh ruled Egypt. Worried that the Jewish people would one day fight against him, Pharaoh decided that these people must become his slaves. As slaves, the Jewish people worked very hard. Every day, from morning until night, they hammered, dug, and carried heavy bricks. They built palaces and cities and worked without rest. The Jewish people hated being slaves. They cried and asked God for help. God chose a man named Moses to lead the Jewish people. Moses went to Pharaoh and said, "God is not happy with the way you treat the Jewish people. He wants you to let the Jewish people leave Egypt and go into the desert, where they will be free." But Pharaoh stamped his foot and shouted, "No, I will never let the Jewish people go." Moses warned, "If you do not listen to God, many terrible things, called plagues, will come to your land." But Pharaoh would not listen, and so the plagues arrived. First, the water turned to blood. Next, frogs, and later, wild animals ran in and out of homes. Balls of hail fell from the sky, and bugs, called locusts, ate all of the Egyptians' foods. Each time a new plague began, Pharaoh would cry, "Moses, I'll let the Jewish people go. Just stop this horrible plague." Yet no sooner would God take away the plague than Pharaoh would shout, "No, I've changed my mind. The Jews must stay." So God sent more plagues. Finally, as the 10th plague arrived, Pharaoh ordered the Jews to leave Egypt. Fearful that Pharaoh might again change his mind, the Jewish people packed quickly. They had no time to prepare food and no time to allow their dough to rise into puffy bread. They had only enough time to make a flat, cracker-like bread called matzah. They hastily tied the matzah to their backs and ran from their homes. The people had not traveled far before Pharaoh commanded his army to chase after them and bring them back to Egypt. The Jews dashed forward, but stopped when they reached a large sea. The sea was too big to swim across. Frightened that Pharaoh's men would soon reach them, the people prayed to God, and the miracle occurred. The sea opened up. 2 walls of water stood in front of them, and a dry, sandy path stretched between the walls. The Jews ran across. Just as they reached the other side, the walls of water fell and the path disappeared. The sea now separated the Jews from the land of Egypt. They were free. Each year at Passover, we eat special foods, sing songs, tell stories, and participate in a Seder, a special meal designed to help us remember this miraculous journey from slavery.
Thank you. Ready to sing? Let's sing a little bit. This is not an original song from the Haggadah, but it's so beautiful and it's so important because the story of the Exodus inspired different people throughout the years in all corners of the world. This song inspired the African American slaves. As far as we know, it was sang first during the Civil War. It's just gorgeous, and we're going to sing it. When
Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. As Israel stood by water's side, let my people go. By God's command it did divide, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. Let my people go.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Ben. The fun of the plagues. You know, every year we look at it as fun, and we have these little plastic things, and sometimes we have masks and we do the whole thing. But for some reason this year, plagues do not seem to be funny or amusing at all. I think for the first time in my life, I understand what it is to be hit personally by a plague. So let's read the traditional plagues, and then you may add your own plagues. It doesn't have to be just the COVID-19. We have other plagues around us that you may want to mention around your Seder table, or just add to the chat box. The tradition is to take a pinky, it's always good to use a pinky, and to dip it in the wine for each plague that we mention. So let's start. Daham, Tzfardea, Kinim, Arov, Dever, Shchihin, Barad, Arbehe, Choshech, Makat Bechorot, and in English, blood, frogs, lice, beasts, cattle disease, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, death of firstborn. Part of the Seder is Hallel, which means praise, and the Hallel contain mostly passages from the book of Psalm that praise God. We'll just have a short one. Let's read it in English, and then we'll sing one line. From slavery to freedom, from despair to joy, from mourning to celebration, from darkness to light, from enslavement to redemption. Let us sing before God a new song. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Kol הנשמה תהללויה, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol הנשמה תהללויה, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Do you want to read for us a short poem by your favorite Israeli poet?
Sure, Yehuda Amichai. And what is the continuity of my life? I am like one who left Egypt. The Red Sea is split in two, and I cross on dry ground with two walls of water on my right and on my left. Behind me, Pharaoh's soldiers and horsemen. Before me, the wilderness, and perhaps the promised land. This is the continuity of my life.
Thank you. We pour now the second cup of wine. I don't have a glass.
Oh, we took away the glasses. Because...
Oh, you took away my... Ben, can you get me a glass from there? No, you had white grape juice there before. I'm not mixing, and I don't want to drink another cup from a metal, from a silver. By the way, we try to use for the Seder, as we normally do, some things that are very meaningful for us. So this Kiddush cup we got married with, it says Gali and Alon, September 14th, 1995.
Yeah, it's
Wow, long time ago.
Dad needs a glass, Ben.
I know I'm going to.
And the Kiddush cups are also from our wedding, the candlesticks. This tablecloth belonged to
It was a gift from my grandmother.
Yes, she lived in Portugal and really loved beautiful tablecloth. It's not something we use often, but today is a special day. And many other things here.
The utensils belong to Gladys.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a lot of people that we love that
yeah,
honor by using
items. We honor and we make them part of our Seders
for
a long time.
All right. Here's
So
the
now
last
when
one.
I get a normal wine glass, thank you. So second one. Okay, we don't need to read the whole thing. I'll just say sing the blessing.
Well,
Children, boys, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. And we need to recline. It's really, really good. When you read old stories, they always write how the wealthy people use goblets of silver and gold. And I never understood why
Yeah,
they
who wants to
enjoy
drink with
this
them?
metallic taste. But glass is good. Okay, we're almost there because now it's the second hand washing, this time with a blessing. This hand washing, we say with a blessing in because we're just about to eat. So since we started with the hand sanitizer, we are going to continue with that. So. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו על נטילת ידיים. Praise are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy with your commandments and commanded us to wash our hands. And now it's time to eat the matzah, but before, let's just read. Why do we eat matzah? We have to explain it because this is one of the questions that we ask during the 4 questions. Please read with me. Why do we eat matzah? To remember that even before our ancestors' dough had time to rise, God rescued them. As the Torah teaches, and they baked the dough which they had brought from Egypt into matzah. It did not rise since they hurried out of Egypt, and they could not delay, nor had they prepared other provisions for themselves. So we lift the matzah, and here's another one of Yoni's creations. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. We give thanks to God for bread.
Thanks, God.
Our voices rise in song together, as our joyful prayer is said. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. And only during the Seder, we're having a special blessings for eating matzah. For the rest of the week, we just use the regular blessing and we use the word lechem, even though this is a matzah. But during the Seder, we have a special blessing that says, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat matzah. Praise are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy with your commandments and commanded us to eat matzah. And we eat a little matzah while we climb. Yoni, it's the best handmade matzah.
This is bad.
This is bad, yeah.
This is awful.
This is awful. We don't hold it against you, but this is
We're
really,
gonna stick to
I
the
agree.
Ben Shevitz matzahs after.
well,
It's bad.
okay, so we explained the matzah, and now we
We're not
are
doing that
eating the
again.
maror.
It's our first
Maror is the bitter herb.
And your last.
And we eat maror. We have a long, beautiful reading, but I'm looking at the time and everyone is hungry. Maror, the bitter herb, meant to remind us of the bitter life of our ancestors who were slaves. And it's not only the story of our ancestors in Egypt. I read many stories recently in order to prepare of people who had to celebrate Passover in really difficult place, from a story that Natan Sharansky, the famous refusenik, wrote of how when he spent time time in solitary. He spent some 9 years in the Gulag, and I think 4 of them were in solitary. It was really awful. And when Pesach arrived, he didn't have any matzah, he didn't have maror, he didn't have wine, he didn't have anything. He hardly even knew the story, because only later in his life he learned more about Judaism. So what he did was to just say whatever he knew, and he says it as loud as he could, hoping that other Jewish people who were in cells near him would hear and maybe will get a little bit of the taste of Passover. I read the stories of the Esh Kodesh, who's a famous rabbi who lived in a Warsaw ghetto and wrote some amazing things. He did not survive, unfortunately, but some of his writings did survive. And he is encouraging us that it's a very difficult experience, but just remember this experience. It's not a good thing, but let's remember and give it meaning. And something similar we learned from Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist in Auschwitz. He did survive and lived, I think, up until his late 80s, if not 90s, and wrote one of the most important books ever written, A Man in Search of Meaning. And he learned how to give meaning to the suffering in the ghetto. He was also one of these health professionals, a psychiatrist. He saw it as his role, his duty to help people with the tremendous mental stress in the death camp in the ghetto. So that's why we eat the maror. So we take a piece of maror, and in this case, it will be the horseradish. And we say the blessing, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat maror. Praise are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy with your commandments and commanded us to eat maror. It can be a horseradish, it can be lettuce, some people use, just something. Endive is a very good one, and some believe that that was the original maror. Tavon. Not so bad. Korech, we're almost there. You said that we're switching. Thank you. Woo. Good. Why did I have to? Okay, back to the Menishevitz matzah. That's a real kick. Okay, matzah. So Hillel, the sage Hillel, used to eat matzah to combine together the matzah, the bitter herb, and the charoset. He was not from where your grandmother was, from Bulgaria, he was from Iraq. So we take one piece of matzah, put some maror, bitter herb, I don't know, oh, I can actually make the picture larger. Okay, on top of it, we put the charoset, which is sweet and nice, with another piece of matzah, and we eat it. We already said the blessing. Oh, this is very good. And by eating Hillel's sandwich, this is the official beginning of our food component of the Seder. I don't think we'll keep the camera here for you to watch us eating. Our children practice a whole week using a fork and knives, but they're not ready for prime time yet. So just, there are some parts after the Seder that you may want to go back to. There are some beautiful songs like Chad Gadia and Echad Mi Yodea. At least you want to do two things. You want to thank God for the food, which is the benching. You don't have to have the long version of it, but just even in your own words, say, thank you, God, for the wonderful food on our table and for the wonderful people who prepare this wonderful food. And the cup of Elijah, because we still have 2 cups to drink that will drip. And the one for Elijah, which symbolizes salvation, symbolizes the end of the atrocities, the end of the difficult time that we're in the midst of. What we like to do is, instead of pouring new wine from the bottle into Elijah's cup, we just take an empty cup that is somewhere that you cannot see, and each participant just poured a little bit of wine from their own cup. So we do it together. I really want to thank you for joining us tonight. I really felt the presence of many more people besides our core family, and I thank you for that. I would like to wish you a happy Passover. Many that join us here, and I really cannot wait for the next time when we can physically get together, not just virtually, to keep celebrating Shabbat and holidays. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Happy
Chag Sameach.
Passover. Gut Yom Tov. Zis und Pesach.